Hi everyone, it's Tim Topham here. I was just writing my blog post about using the 12-bar blues format to inspire my beginners, and I thought it's going to be much easier if I just show you what I do, and hopefully you can use it with your kids if you don't already do something similar. The 12-bar blues form is really useful as soon as kids can play some triads basically. So in C, all they need to know is how to play a C major triad, F, and a G. And so the first rendition of the 12-bar blues format I use, we always play through the same structure, so it's the same 12 bars, so they get used to how that works. And the first time I get them just to play octaves in the left hand and the chord in their right hand. And if they're smaller, maybe just the chord or just a single note in the left hand, just so they get used to moving and shifting between chord shapes and movement on the piano. So I'd go something like this. I'd normally always play on a second piano, often with rhythms and some drums as well, because it gets a little bit boring at the start otherwise. So it sounds something like this. 2, 3, 4. I'm doing is holding those chords each for 4 beats, pretty quick 4 beats, and on the keyboard at the same time I'd normally play something like that while they're still just doing those first set of chords. Just makes it more interesting. So when they can do that, and I normally move through this pretty quickly, I'll introduce all of this in one lesson and then let them go away and muck around with it all week. So we do that, and then next thing I'll get them to do is do exactly the same thing but play triads in both hands. Etc. Sounds a little bit boring on its own, that's why I tend to move quite quickly through it. When they can do that, I then say, well, let's make your part more interesting, let's break up the left hand, we'll play a broken chord pattern. Liking that because it sounds kind of cool. The next thing I show them is using a fifths and sixth pattern in their left hand. So fifths and sixths, that standard kind of grungy, boogie woogie kind of feel. So I'll get them to then do that through the sequence again. Just use 5 and 1 both chord positions, much easier in the left hand. When they can do that, I'll then introduce the flattened seventh to the left hand pattern, so we'll have... I tend to really like that one. And then I start working on the right hand, so that's all about different things they can do with the left hand, and I say go away and experiment with those ones. Find out the one that you like the most and get used to playing around with it. The next thing I introduce in the right hand is, depending on where they're up to, a lot of kids find this quite difficult, some find it kind of easy. It kind of depends on how they're rhythmically and musically structured and inclined, I think. But I'll try and get them to do an offbeat chord in the right hand. So we'll go back to this pattern, nice and slowly, and then I'll get them to play together in the gap. And often that takes a week or so for them to get and to practice. So I'll sometimes get them recorded on their mobile phone in the lesson so they can hear how it sounds, and then when they go home they haven't forgotten how to put it together. If they can do that, I'll then introduce some more interesting chords to put with the right hand. So I normally teach them for C, I like that chord. They seem to enjoy playing that. So that's an E, a B flat and a D. And then under the F, I tend to go for that sound. It's only moving 2 notes down the semitone, the 2 bottom notes. So E flat, A and B. a G7 kind of chord, F, B and D. They seem to like playing those because they're much more interesting. Offbeat chords and some 7s and 9s and things always sound much better. So when they can do that, or they've got some experience with that, I'll then introduce them to some other cool things they can do with their right hand. We'll generally talk about the blues scale, C blues scale, C, E flat, F, F sharp, G, B flat and C. And I'll get them to just play that in time with me as I do everything, all the left hand part on the other keyboard, so they don't have to worry about it, they just play up and down the scale. And they tend to love playing that, it sounds instantly very cool. When they're more used to that, I say, okay, well you can do some 2 notes in the time of my 1 if you want every now and then. And if you like 2 notes, stick to them. Mistake, or you know, when they're first learning it, I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter, you're only half a semitone away from the nearest right note, and it doesn't really matter in jazz anyway, you can do whatever you want. So they seem to like that flexibility as well. So once they start getting that, the only other thing I'll introduce to them in 1 or 2 lessons worth is the idea of picking a note of the triad, whatever chord you're playing, we'll have the octave as well, and just playing thirds or fifths or fourths as triplets against whatever the left hand's doing. So for C, I reckon the G and the C sounds good, and everyone seems to like doing that. So I'll teach them the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, that kind of a feel. The steps that I'll use to introduce it, and you can do an amazing lot of very cool sounding things reasonably simply, and I find you can do this within the first, or start introducing this within the first few weeks of lessons. Not all of that complexity obviously, but just the start of it, and then every lesson just building a new element. Hey, remember the blues we were playing last week? Let's try something new that we can do. Oh, we can go up to the flat 7th on the left hand. Oh, that's really cool, you know. That's the sort of thing that I really like seeing kids do. Obviously there's heaps more to offer, and for perhaps the high level kids you can say, okay, go away and come up with your own version of a left hand doing this kind of thing. Or they might come up with a standard walking bass pattern, you can show them that. There's just so much to be done with it. And the next step as well is to go, okay, well we know now blues in C, we know the chord structure, 1s, 4s and 5s, so let's now work in a related key. So let's now play blues in G. So they've got 2 chords of the same, the G chord and the C chord, and they've got 1 new chord to learn, the D chord. So there's another thing that they can do during the week. One other pattern that I like with the right hand as well is that standard kind of bluesy feel pattern, just moving up in thirds to the flat and 7th. Kids can find that a bit trickier, but if they're a little bit more advanced, then they'll catch on to that pretty quickly as well. So there you go, I won't talk anymore, enjoy it, let me know if you've got any questions.